Hello, fellow AI art enthusiasts. My name is Thane, and yet again, I have brought you 50 different looking styles you may want to try out yourself. This time, we have yet another deep dive video into Midjourney's SREF codes. The topic or overarching theme of all the styles of this video is cinematic. The common aspect of all these styles is that they mostly looked like still images from a movie. So they are basically all photorealistic and they have kind of moody movie lighting. Basically they just felt cinematic, to me. I also really like exploring the SREF feature in Midjourney, because it just brings about surprise after surprise for me. You can't tell based on a number what you will end up with. Let's see how long we can keep on discovering these before new stuff is released by Midjourney. As has become custom for these deep dive videos, I have prompted each of the style code numbers 5 times. First prompt is the introductory landscape prompt. I named all the styles with the help of ChatGPT and sometimes Claude, too. And for the first image that you will see of each style, I have used that invented style name as the prompt. Sometimes the descriptions have been spot on and they basically look exactly like the style should look like. And other times it happens so that the style name slightly overpowers the style and makes it present differently. But you should get an overall sense of each of the styles. I use 4 parameters for the prompts. The most important, of course, being the --SREF and the number of the style. The --seed 777 is something I have been using since the very early days of this channel. You can leave it out unless you want to generate the exact same or very similar looking images as I did. Then comes the aspect ratio 16:9, which sets the image to a landscape ratio. And lastly, the --V 6.1 specifies that the image was made using the Midjourney version 6.1. For the remaining 4 images I have prompted the same words with each of the styles and set them side by side. The only thing that is different is the aspect ratio 9:16, which makes portrait ratio images. The words I have chosen for the prompts of this video are detective, mansion, highway and canyon. I chose detective because cinematic theme kind of makes me think of an old school detective for some reason. And it represents a person. I chose mansion because I wanted to include an architectural theme. Often movies show some very opulent mansions. I chose highway because that is a recurring sight in many movies. I almost went with train, but that tended to make many images where people were walking on the train tracks with a train headed for them, and that didn't look right. And as the last topic I chose canyon, because I wanted to include some nature in the selection of words. Now that I think about it, canyons are not a very prevalent theme in movies, but I decided to go with it. And the parameters are basically the same as with the landscape images, so no need to go over those again. Before we get started with the styles, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my patrons over on Patreon. You guys have really made a difference for me keeping the lights on for this channel. I am by no means at a point where I could do this full time, so it's nice to have some support in exchange for the time it takes me to make these images and these videos. So thank you again. And if you would like to join these wonderful people, you would get some benefits too. For example, I have recently started releasing my videos a day early for all the paying Patreons. And I also have the prompt PDFs from all of my latest videos with all the prompts of a video. And some extras as well, with all of the images. So please check out the link in the description for that. But now, let's look at the styles and let's see what the styles look like on closer inspection. 4. Nocturnal Silhouette Tales. This looks actually very dark and gritty. Silhouettes are indeed a theme here. Maybe good for a few scenes, but you would need to mix this in with something more colorful so it would not look so dark and sinister. 116. Noir Cinematic Melancholy. This one is slightly dark as well, but there is some color and some light to it. Very interesting points of view. Maybe slightly photographic even, but more of a movie feel for me. 141. Nostalgic Sepia Vignettes. Okay, on a closer look, this actually loses some of its realness. It's more like a photorealistic illustration, but it has some interesting aesthetics, 203. Monochrome Urban Desolation. This style actually has some images from during the day, but the scenes look so gloomy and desolate and, to be honest, quite sad. For some reason I get a 90s feel from these images. 290. Mysterious Glowing Forest Visions. Now something way more colorful with a strong teal presence. We go back to the nighttime with very dapper top hats for the detectives, still kind of rainy and dilapidated and not always too photorealistic. 389. Dreamy Natural Realism. With this one we get some pink flowers and pink clouds or mist. Still a little bit sad and rainy though. It's hard to place an era for this style, it's kind of all over the place. 403. Dark Atmospheric Dystopian. This is just slightly fake looking. Maybe just some bad CGI or something. Detectives have moved to fedoras. Still nighttime, still rainy and gloomy with the exception of canyon images. 445. Sepia Dramatic Cinematic. Now this is an aesthetic. Still kind of gloomy, but with warm tones. This looks something like steampunk Victorian meets Baroque. Even the highways look kind of not very modern at all. My favorite so far. 628. Amber Nostalgic Warmth. This has a similar color tone to it, but it's a bit more modern. It's hard to determine if this is hipster or 1950s. The cars look pretty old, but the canyon pictures with women sitting and overlooking the canyon look much more modern times. 636. Sepia Dramatic Historical. The lighting of this feels very cinematic to me, but this may also look kind of like a painting rather than a movie. Certainly from an older era, maybe from even the end of 1800s. 649. Monochrome Cinematic Noir. I think I might be noticing a pattern for these cinematic styles. They all tend to be kind of dark and rainy. This is that and somewhat mysterious and slightly illustrative if you look closely. 724. Enchanted Gothic Fantasy. This has lots of daytime as well. Looks a little like vintage photography. Highways are basically dirt roads. There seems to be one very old car in one of the images. 748. Teal Mystical Surrealism. Something just felt so epic and cinematic to me about this style. But it is pretty surreal. Slightly like photography, again dark and cloudy. But very interesting and weird visuals. 808. Earthy Textured Realism. This feels a bit 90s to me for some reason. The images look slightly fake to me for some reason. But again, dark and rainy. 970. Ethereal Particle Fantasy. I chose this one because the original images looked so much like out of a fantasy movie. There are some photorealistic elements in the images, but a lot of sparkly and pink gems as well. 971. Dark Enchanted Realism. This has a kind of a 70s or 80s movie quality to it. Again rainy and kind of dark. I am starting to feel like this is kind of a theme with these styles. 1042. Post-Apocalyptic Dystopia. The style name is not that wrong in my opinion. There's lots of abandoned buildings and broken down cars in these images, but the color scheme is surprisingly not that dark and very orange. 1043. Cozy Rustic Interiors. Very warm color tone. Feels pretty much like recent times to me. The detectives look like they are going to a costume party. 1048. Dark Mystical Twilight. Yet another pretty dark-looking style. This reminds me of an 80s movie. It has prevalent blue tones and mist in most of the images. 1135. Wintry Regal Splendor. This style is also pretty gloomy. It doesn't exactly remind me of a particular time period, more like a fantasy genre with ornate details. 1196. Nostalgic Medieval Dream. Medieval doesn't seem to be quite right for this style. Historical, yes, but not medieval. It looks a little surreal in some images. The canyons have interesting shapes. 1209. Nostalgic Vintage Cinematic. Now this is very colorful for a change. It looks very sharp and colorful and feels like a movie that was made in recent times but depicted 50s or 60s. 1224. Scarlet Surreal Horror Illustration. This is a strange one. Definitely in the horror genre. It's gloomy and misty, but with an interesting red glow. For some reason it reminds me of horror movies, even though none that I know have ever looked like this. 1241. Noir Urban Photography. Now back to the darker styles. Again we have nighttime, and not very bright images even if there isn't night on the images. 1255. Muted Rustic Nostalgic Earthy. This is kind of a mix between a cinematic style and a painted style. Color scheme is mostly beige and the feel is otherwise pretty dark and moody. 1278. Dark Moody Atmospheric Cinematic. On a closer look, this actually kind of reminds me some video game graphics or video game cinematics. Again, pretty dark, but there is an interesting lighting present. 1280. Foggy Desaturated Eerie Atmospheric. This might actually be more a photography style instead. Again, very dark and foggy, but it's photorealistic. 1310. Dark Muted Photographic Atmospheric. The first thing that comes to mind to me is The Matrix. A somber style, but very obviously science fiction. 1377. Dark Cinematic Photography Atmospheric. This is actually kind of surreal and possibly more suited to a movie poster rather than what the movie actually looks like. Again, very dark. 1414. Dark Digital Cinematic Dramatic. This looks slightly surreal. There is fantasy themes going on. It's again quite dark, kind of messy and chaotic and abandoned. 1451. Crimson Noir Photography Atmospheric. Yet another dark one. This may actually remind me more of a video game. It's photorealistic, but there is kind of a fake quality to it. 1486. Blue Atmospheric Photography. Yet another quite dark and misty style. There is an abandoned or run-down feel to it. The color tones look pretty cold. The lights seem to have a blue tint. 1525. Chromatic Twilight Landscapes. Obviously I have never seen a movie with this kind of a color scheme, but the underlying look is very cinematic. It's just overlaid with a colorful vignette. 1601. Golden Solitude Shadows. This style looks pretty clean. Actually reminds more of photography on a closer look. It's dark, but the golden beige tones soften the darkness significantly. 1625. Golden Horizon Dreamscapes. This looks very colorful compared to most of the styles we have seen. Again, mostly taking place at night or at sunset. But there is strong yellow lighting with very blue skies or a pool. 1653. Esoteric Gothic Luminescence. And we go straight back to the really dark styles where you can't even make out the faces on people. But the style has an interesting aesthetic, kind of a red-brown tint and very intricate glowing lines. 1657. Golden Hour Solitude. This style is very bright in comparison to the others. It's very golden and filled with lights. It looks slightly fake and mostly photographic rather than cinematic. 1784. Cinematic Noir Drama. And now we go back to the darker styles. There is daylight in some of the images, but overall still pretty dark. Maybe it's the dark clothes. 1796. Gothic Urban Realism. This is dark as well, but this style has some bright red highlights, be it carpets, ties, skirts or just reflections from tail lights. 1948. Sepia Fog Retro Photography. This is actually not that dark, but it's quite misty and weird. It has a kind of a surreal quality to it. Doesn't feel too present day to me, but I can't place the era. 2021. Cinematic Sci-Fi Fantasy Realism. This is a funny mix of fantasy and science fiction. It's slightly fake-looking and very chaotic with debris flying around. It's dark, but with strong light sources. 2060. Amber Twilight Solitude. This has a retro look to it. Again, pretty dark and gritty, but it has warm color tones and there are light sources that illuminate the images. 2122. Surreal Desert Sci-Fi. This does have some cinematic feel to it, but it is indeed quite surreal looking and it also has some sci-fi elements. Looks slightly retro and the color palette is strange. 2159. Scarlet Veil Airbrushed. This style has a misty feel to it. Again, slightly surreal. I also get a science fiction feel from this. The nature vistas look really impressive. 2244. Emerald Mist Glazing. This style indeed has a slight emerald tint to it with mist. Slightly fake looking actually, reminiscent of very good video game graphics. I get a fantasy feel from this one. 2260. Frosted Jade Desolation. The color scheme of this is pretty light actually, but the themes are pretty dark. This has unmistakably Soviet aesthetics, especially coming across from the detective and highway images. 2261. Sandy Beige Wash. Slightly vintage feel, maybe 40s era, but colored. The detective images look very cool and are like stills from an action movie. 2267. Bronze Sky Dry Brush. Quite dark yet colorful style, it has a vintage feel to it, but again I can't really place the era. The lamps look pretty interesting and unique. 2272. Lavender Dawn Futurism. Yet another dark style, but this time with a lavender tint to it. I get an 80s feel from this style. Maybe it's the velvet sofas and the image quality. 2543. Charcoal Frost Matte. This is a strange one, almost photographic quality to it. Some odd colors here with the pink. Again, kind of a dark tone to it. So there you go. 50 Midjourney SREF styles that looked like they could be cinematic. So what did I learn from making this video is that cinematic tends to equal dark and gritty, at least for me. Not sure why there weren't more brighter colors. Maybe the bright colored ones I already explored in the sci-fi video. You can check that out next if you have not seen it yet. We had different kinds of eras in this mix, and it was kind of a struggle to find 50 of these, from the 2,600 styles I combed through to find these. And even then there ended up being a few that looked like illustrations, or kind of fake. But I hope that these styles may be something you were looking for to get a particular aesthetic for your project. These might go well now with the rise of all kinds of new video generation models. I have dabbled with those in the past, so I should probably take a closer look at their new capabilities. I thank you so much for watching and let's continue prompting.